The stars were cold and distant as the UEDF Vigilance moved through the darkness near Neptune's orbit. Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge watching the sensor displays with the calm expression of a man who had done this patrol 100 times before. His crew worked quietly at their stations, and the soft hum of the fusion drive was the only sound breaking the silence. Lieutenant Amy Wright monitored the tactical console, while Commander Paul Bennett checked the engineering readouts from his station near the back of the bridge. Everything seemed normal for another routine patrol along the outer edges of humanity's solar system. It was the year 2247, and humanity had spread across the inner solar system like seeds scattered by the wind. Mars held 3 million colonists living in massive domed cities and working in the vast underground factories. The asteroid belt buzzed with mining operations that fed the hungry industrial complexes orbiting Earth. Luna had become a shipyard where new vessels were born in the orbital docks hanging above the ancient gray surface. Fusion drives could push ships to Mars in just 3 weeks, and the dream of reaching the stars seemed closer with each passing year. The United Earth Defense Force patrolled the system with 40 warships and twice as many support vessels. They watched for pirates and settled disputes between mining claims and generally kept the peace in the growing human civilization. Daniel had commanded the Vigilance for 3 years and loved every moment of it. She was a destroyer-class vessel with railguns mounted along her spine and enough armor to take a beating. His crew of 80 souls kept her running smoothly through the long patrols that sometimes lasted months. Lieutenant Greg Foster managed the communications array and kept everyone connected to the rest of the fleet. The officers were good people who knew their jobs and trusted their captain. Life was predictable and safe in the way that military service could be when no one was shooting at you. Then the sensor screamed. Amy's head snapped up from her console and her fingers danced across the controls. The main display flickered and showed something massive appearing near their position. Daniel felt his heart rate pick up as he watched the impossible happen right in front of his eyes. A ship materialized out of nothing about 50,000 kilometers away, and it was huge. The Vigilance was 300 meters long and massed about 40,000 tons. This alien vessel dwarfed her like an ocean liner next to a fishing boat. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as the crew scrambled to battle stations. Paul ran diagnostics on the weapons systems while Amy tried to get a sensor lock on the newcomer. Greg's fingers flew across his keyboard as he attempted to hail the alien ship on every frequency humanity had ever used. Daniel felt the weight of command settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. Everything he did in the next few minutes might determine whether humanity survived or died. The alien ship hung in space like a sleeping giant. Its hull was smooth and dark with strange patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. Energy readings spiked across every spectrum the human sensors could detect. Whatever power source drove that monster made their fusion reactor look like a candle next to the sun. No weapons were visible, but Daniel knew that meant nothing. Something that big could hide entire weapons batteries inside its hull. Greg looked up from his station with wide eyes. "They are responding, sir." The words came out quiet, but everyone on the bridge heard them clearly. Daniel straightened his uniform jacket and tried to look more confident than he felt. "Put them on screen." The main display changed to show a figure that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. The alien was tall and crystalline, with a body that seemed to be made of living diamond. Light refracted through its form in rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. 2 eyes like deep pools of darkness stared out from the angular face. When it spoke, the translator software turned the strange musical sounds into words that chilled Daniel to his bone. "I am Ambassador Kelrin of the Valorian Council. Your species has been observed and catalogued. You will now submit to Council authority or face the consequences of defiance." Daniel felt his mouth go dry, but he kept his voice steady. "This is Captain Daniel Harris of the United Earth Defense Force. We mean no harm, but we will not submit to threats. Humanity is a free and sovereign people." Kelrin's crystalline face shifted in what might have been amusement or contempt. "Freedom is a concept for species that have earned the right to it. You are primitives playing with fire. The Council has maintained order in this region for 2,000 years. You will accept our guidance or you will be removed as a threat to galactic stability." The ambassador made a gesture and the view screen split to show an asteroid tumbling through space about 30,000 kilometers away. It was maybe 200 meters across and had probably been drifting there since the solar system formed. Daniel watched as the space around it seemed to shimmer and twist. The asteroid simply vanished with no flash or explosion or any sign it had ever existed. 3 seconds later, it reappeared as an expanding cloud of vapor and debris. Our teleportation technology can move objects anywhere within our range. Kelrin's voice was cold and matter-of-fact. Your weapons and shields are primitive. Your ships are slow. You cannot hide from us, and you cannot fight us. Surrender is your only rational choice. Daniel felt sweat running down his back under his uniform. He looked at Amy and saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. Paul's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Greg looked like he wanted to crawl under his console and hide. The captain took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I need to relay your message to my superiors. He kept his voice level and professional. Give us 72 hours to respond. Kelrin seemed to consider this for a long moment. You may have your time. Use it wisely. We will be watching. The transmission cut off and the alien ship hung in space like a sword hanging over humanity's throat. Daniel opened a channel to Earth Defense Command and began his report. Admiral Helen Clark listened without interrupting as he described the encounter and the alien ultimatum. Her face remained calm, but he could see the calculations running behind her eyes. When he finished, she was quiet for several seconds. Return to Mars orbit, Captain. We need to convene an emergency council and you need to be there. She paused and her expression hardened. And Daniel, good work keeping your head. What you did today might have just saved our species. The transmission ended and Daniel slumped in his chair. Amy moved to stand beside him. Sir, what do we do if they decide to fight? Her voice was quiet so the rest of the crew would not hear. Daniel looked at the tactical display showing the massive alien vessel. We figure out how to kill something that can teleport and has shields that can vaporize asteroids. He tried to sound confident, but inside he was terrified. Humanity had just met something far beyond their technology and far more powerful than anything they had ever imagined. The next 72 hours would determine whether they lived as free people or died as slaves. The vigilance turned toward home and began the long burn to Mars. Behind them, the alien ship waited and watched. The Council had given humanity time to accept their fate, but Kelrin already knew how this would end. Every species submitted eventually. These humans would be no different. They were too primitive to understand what they faced and too weak to resist even if they tried. The ambassador settled into his meditation chamber and began composing his report to the Council. This would be a simple integration just like all the others. In 2,000 years, no species had ever successfully defied the Council's will. Kelrin had no idea how wrong he was. The emergency council chamber on Mars was packed with humanity's most powerful leaders and military minds. Admiral Helen Clark stood at the head of the massive table, while holographic displays showed the alien vessel still waiting near Neptune. President James Morrison sat with his hands folded and his face grave. Around them were admirals and generals and scientists who had been pulled from their work to deal with this crisis. Daniel sat near the back and watched as the debate raged back and forth about what humanity should do. Some argued for immediate surrender. The alien technology was too advanced and fighting would only lead to extinction. Others wanted to fight regardless of the cost because freedom was worth dying for. Admiral Richard Stone studied the tactical data that Daniel's ship had collected and said nothing while everyone else argued. He was the chief of naval operations and the best strategic mind in the fleet. When he finally spoke, everyone went quiet to listen. The aliens think we are primitives and they are right about our technology. Stone's voice was calm and measured, but they made a mistake when they demonstrated their power. They showed us exactly how their weapons work and what they expect us to do. He pulled up the footage of the asteroid being destroyed. Their teleportation can move objects instantly, but it takes time to target. Their shields can deflect energy weapons, but I saw no indication they tested them against kinetic strikes. He looked around the table with sharp eyes. They have never fought anyone who uses railguns because they think kinetic weapons are obsolete. Commander Lisa Grant spoke up from her position near the tactical displays. She ran Earth's intelligence analysis and had spent the last 6 hours studying every second of the encounter. Our railguns can accelerate tungsten projectiles to 12% of light speed. At that velocity, the kinetic energy is enormous. If their shields are not calibrated for solid matter moving that fast, we might be able to punch through. She brought up calculations that covered the holographic screens, but we would need to get close and fire in mass volleys. 1 or 2 shots might be stopped, but 30 rounds hitting simultaneously would overwhelm any defensive system. Admiral Clark nodded slowly as the pieces fell into place. So we buy time and prepare a first strike. Make them think we are going to surrender and then hit them with everything we have before they know what is happening. The room went silent as everyone considered the implications. It was a dangerous gamble that could backfire catastrophically. If the aliens survived the first strike, humanity would face their full fury. But if they did nothing, Earth would become a vassal state controlled by alien masters. President Morrison stood and looked at each person in the room. "We did not ask for this fight, but we will not bow to threats. Prepare your strike, but do it quietly. I will send a diplomatic response requesting a formal ceremony to discuss our integration. That should give us the time we need." He turned to Daniel. "Captain Harris, you will return to that alien ship and deliver my message. Make them believe we are resigned to our fate." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity hidden beneath a surface of calm acceptance. Daniel returned to the Vigilance and flew back to Kelrin's massive vessel. He delivered the message with a defeated tone that made him sick to his stomach. The alien ambassador accepted with obvious satisfaction. A grand ceremony would be held at the Council's regional station near Saturn in 5 days. 12 Council ships would gather to witness humanity's formal submission. Kelrin seemed pleased that these primitives understood their place in the galactic order. While diplomats played their parts, the military moved with silent efficiency. Every warship in the fleet began converging on Saturn through routes that appeared innocent. Cargo haulers and mining vessels suddenly developed engine troubles that required them to drift toward the gas giant. Maintenance schedules were adjusted so that dozens of ships needed to be in that region for completely legitimate reasons. To any outside observer, it looked like normal traffic patterns, just slightly busier than usual. Paul worked 72 hours straight, modifying the Vigilance's railgun systems. Dr. Carl Murphy had designed experimental magnetic field generators that could mask the energy signature of the weapons until the moment they fired. The technology was untested and might not work, but it was their only chance at maintaining surprise. Engineering teams across 60 ships installed the same modifications and pushed their reactors beyond normal safety limits. They would get one chance at this, and the guns needed to fire at maximum power. Amy coordinated with tactical officers throughout the fleet. Every ship was assigned specific targets based on their position and firing solutions. The timing had to be perfect because if even one ship fired early, the entire plan would collapse. She ran the simulations over and over until she could see the attack pattern in her dreams. 300 railgun rounds would fill space in a precisely coordinated strike that would hit 12 targets within a 2-second window. Ambassador Nicole Foster led the official Earth delegation that would attend the ceremony. She was a career diplomat who had negotiated mining treaties and colonial disputes, but nothing had prepared her for this. Marine Colonel Stephen Hayes and his team would accompany her as honor guards. Hidden in their formal uniforms were scanning devices that would map the Council station's internal layout. Every piece of information they could gather might be useful in the battles to come. The day of the ceremony arrived with terrible inevitability. The human fleet formed up around Saturn in a pattern that looked like an honor guard, but was actually a carefully designed kill box. Admiral Clark commanded from the UEDF resolution and maintained complete radio silence. Every captain knew their role and their targets. They just needed to wait for the signal. The Council station was a massive structure that orbited Saturn's moon Titan. It gleamed in the pale sunlight and displayed the architectural achievements of 7 alien species. 12 warships surrounded it in a defensive formation that showed centuries of military tradition. They expected no threat and kept their shields at minimal power to conserve energy. Ambassador Foster's shuttle approached the station and docked without incident. Inside the Grand Hall, Kelrin stood with representatives from all 7 Council species. They were tall and short and crystalline and scaled and covered in fur. Each one looked at the human delegation with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. The ceremony was meant to be a demonstration of power and a lesson in humility. Humanity would kneel before the Council and accept their place as the newest and lowest member of the Galactic Order. Kelrin began his speech about the wisdom of knowing one's limitations and the benefits of accepting guidance from superior civilizations. He spoke for 20 minutes about the Council's 2,000-year history and how they had brought peace and order to hundreds of worlds. The human delegation stood silently and appeared to listen with appropriate deference. Colonel Hayes scanned everything his eyes could reach and transmitted the data in encrypted bursts that looked like random electronic noise. Finally, Kelrin gestured toward Ambassador Foster. You may now formally surrender the sovereignty of Earth and pledge your loyalty to the Council. Speak the words and accept your fate." The hall went completely silent. Every alien eye focused on the human woman standing alone before them. Foster looked at Kelrin and then at each of the other Council representatives. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Humanity respectfully declines." For 3 full seconds nobody moved. The aliens could not comprehend what they had just heard. No species had ever refused the Council in this setting. It was unthinkable and impossible, and yet this primitive human had just done exactly that. Kelrin's crystalline face shifted through several colors that might have indicated rage or shock or both. Admiral Clark received the signal through her encrypted channel. The single word appeared on her screen and she did not hesitate. "Execute." Her fingers moved across the command console and the order flashed to every ship in the fleet simultaneously. 60 warships opened fire at exactly the same instant. 300 tungsten rods launched from magnetic rails at 12% of light speed. They crossed the distance to their targets in seconds and struck before the Council ships could react. The kinetic energy of each impact was measured in megatons. Shields designed to deflect lasers and particle beams offered no resistance to solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. Metal tore through metal and reactors ruptured and hulls split open to the vacuum. 8 Council ships died in the first 30 seconds of the battle. Their crews never knew what killed them. The remaining 4 vessels scrambled to activate their combat systems and return fire. On the station, alarms blared, and Ambassador Foster smiled coldly at Kelrin's shocked expression. The war had begun and humanity had struck the first blow. The 4 surviving Council ships recovered from their shock and began fighting back with terrible efficiency. Kelrin's flagship calculated targeting coordinates and a fusion warhead materialized inside the UEDF Defender's reactor core. The human destroyer vanished in a blinding flash that left nothing but expanding plasma. The UEDF Guardian took evasive action, but a second teleported bomb replaced its entire bridge section with nuclear fire. 73 crew members died instantly, and the ship tumbled out of control, spilling atmosphere and bodies into space. Daniel watched his tactical display fill with red indicators as friends and comrades died. The Council weapons were exactly as devastating as they had feared. But Amy was already implementing the contingency plan they had rehearsed during the preparation. All ships execute random thrust pattern Delta 9. Her voice cut through the chaos on the command channel. The human fleet broke formation and began making unpredictable course changes every few seconds. The Council targeting systems needed precise coordinates to teleport their weapons accurately. A ship moving in straight lines was an easy target, but one that changed direction constantly became nearly impossible to hit. The aliens fired again and again, but most of their warheads materialized in empty space where human ships had been seconds earlier. A few scored hits and 3 more human vessels were destroyed, but the casualty rate dropped dramatically. Paul reported from engineering that the railguns were overheating from the sustained fire rate. Barrel temperatures were approaching critical levels, and the cooling systems could not keep up. Daniel made the hard choice. "Keep firing until the guns melt if you have to. We only need them to work for the next hour." He knew he was asking his crew to risk catastrophic failures, but there was no other option. This battle would be won or lost in the next 60 minutes. The space around Saturn became a chaotic battlefield that followed no conventional rules. Amy proposed using the ring system as cover, and Admiral Clark immediately ordered the entire fleet to dive into the massive debris field. Human ships scattered among billions of ice chunks and rocky fragments that orbited the gas giant. The smaller, more agile destroyers darted between obstacles while the Council's massive warships struggled to navigate the dense environment. Council cruiser pursued 3 human destroyers into the rings and found itself at a terrible disadvantage. Its shields protected against energy weapons, but colliding with house-sized chunks of ice at high velocity caused serious damage. The human ships knew these rings from years of survey missions and moved through them with practiced ease. They led their pursuer deeper into the densest section of the B-ring where visibility dropped to almost nothing. Daniel coordinated the ambush with Commander Kate Williams of the UEDF Ranger and Captain Joey Martinez of the UEDF Striker. The 3 ships spread out and waited while the Council cruiser pushed forward, blindly searching for them. When the alien vessel passed between their positions, all 3 destroyers opened fire simultaneously from different angles. 90 railgun rounds converged on the target in a devastating crossfire. The cruiser's shields flared and failed under the massed kinetic impact. Tungsten rods punched through armor and deep into the ship's interior. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull and it broke apart, spilling debris and atmosphere. The victory was short-lived as another council ship teleported into the rings and destroyed, the striker with a single well-placed warhead. Joey and his entire crew of 68 people were gone in an instant. Daniel felt rage and grief tear through him but pushed the emotions down. There would be time to mourn later if any of them survived. Kelrin's flagship was hunting Admiral Clark's carrier with single-minded determination. The Resolution was humanity's largest and most valuable ship, and losing her would cripple fleet coordination. Clark ordered her fighter squadrons to launch, and 30 small craft swarmed out to harass the alien vessel. The fighters carried missiles with conventional warheads that did no real damage but forced the council ship to split its attention between multiple targets. Commander, Paul Bennett had an idea that was either brilliant or insane. Sir, if we vent our reactor coolant into space, it will create a thermal cloud that might blind their sensors. The heat signature would be enormous and chaotic. It might give us a few seconds of cover. Daniel did not hesitate. Do it. Paul opened the emergency vents and superheated coolant sprayed into the vacuum, creating an expanding sphere of glowing gas around the Vigilance. The council sensors could not penetrate the thermal interference and lost their targeting lock. Daniel used those precious seconds to reposition his ship behind a large moonlet. When the cloud dissipated, the Vigilance was nowhere the aliens expected. Amy had already calculated new firing solutions and the railguns spoke again. 6 rounds hit the council ship's engine section and disabled its main drive. The vessel began tumbling slowly, unable to maneuver. Across the battlefield, similar small victories added up. Human crews fought with desperate creativity, while the council ships relied on their superior technology. But technology alone could not overcome determination and tactical flexibility. The aliens had not fought a real war in centuries, and it showed in their rigid tactical doctrine. Every time they adapted to a human trick, another one appeared to confound them. 4 hours into the battle, 3 council ships remained operational, but all were damaged. Kelrin's flagship had lost its primary weapons array. A second ship was venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. The third had only minimal shield strength remaining. The alien commander made the calculation that any competent officer would make. They were winning, but the cost was becoming unacceptable. Better to withdraw and return with overwhelming force. The 3 council ships activated their emergency teleportation systems. Space twisted around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. Reality seemed to fold and unfold, and the alien vessels vanished, leaving only exotic radiation signatures. The human fleet held position for several minutes, expecting a trap, but the aliens were truly gone. They had retreated and left humanity in possession of the battlefield. Admiral Clark broadcast to all remaining ships. All vessels report status and casualties. The responses came in slowly as damaged ships assessed their losses. 22 human vessels were destroyed outright. Another 15 were so badly damaged they would need months of repairs. Over 3,000 crew members were dead or missing. The butcher's bill was terrible, but they had survived. Daniel slumped in his command chair and felt exhaustion crash over him like a physical wave. Around him, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence. They had done the impossible and defeated a technologically superior enemy. But the victory tasted like ash when he thought about all the friends who would never go home. Lieutenant Greg Foster was crying quietly at his station. Amy stared at her tactical display with empty eyes. Paul reported that 2 of their railguns had suffered catastrophic failures, and the ship's reactor was running at 30% efficiency. The debris field around Saturn told the story of the battle. Wreckage from both fleets drifted through the rings in slow motion. Human and alien bodies floated in the vacuum alongside shattered metal and frozen atmosphere. Rescue teams began searching for survivors in the damaged ships. Medical vessels moved among the fleet, treating the wounded and recovering the dead. Admiral Clark opened a fleet-wide channel, and her voice carried to every surviving ship. All vessels, this is Clark. You fought with courage and skill against an enemy that thought we were beneath them. Today we prove that humanity will never submit to tyranny. Well done. She paused and her voice became harder. But this is not over. The Council will return with more ships and they will be prepared for our tactics. Return to rally points and prepare for salvage operations. We need to repair what we can and learn everything possible from the alien wreckage. Daniel ordered the Vigilance to begin rescue operations near the destroyed Guardian. They picked up 17 survivors from the wreck, including the ship's chief medical officer, who had been in the aft section when the bridge was destroyed. Each rescue felt like a small victory against the darkness. They worked through the night, pulling people from disabled ships and providing emergency repairs where possible. On Earth, the news of the battle spread like wildfire. Humanity had met an alien empire and fought them to a standstill. The celebrations were loud and joyous, but President Morrison knew the terrible truth. They had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. The Council would not accept this humiliation. They would come back with more ships and more weapons. And next time they would not underestimate their human opponents. In the cold darkness between worlds, a Council message probe carried news of the defeat toward the alien homeworld. When that message arrived, the full might of an ancient empire would turn its attention toward Earth. The Grand Fleet had not been fully mobilized in 400 years, but it would sail now. Humanity had bought itself time with blood and courage, but the reckoning was coming. The Council homeworld received news of the defeat with a stunned silence that spread through the grand chambers like poison. Grand Arbiter Thessian stood before the assembled representatives of 7 species and tried to comprehend what the message probe was telling them. For 2,000 years, the Council had enforced their will across hundreds of star systems without serious resistance. Now, a species that still used chemical rockets had destroyed 9 of their warships and forced the survivors to retreat. The debate that followed was fierce and bitter. Some species called for immediate, overwhelming retaliation. Others urged caution and suggested they try to understand how these humans had achieved such an unlikely victory. Commander Vexar of the Council military demanded authorization to deploy the Grand Fleet. 200 warships would crush this human infestation and serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider defiance. Thessian authorized the deployment despite the objections of the more moderate voices. On Earth, the celebrations faded quickly when intelligence reports began arriving. Commander Lisa Grant stood before the Defense Council and presented her analysis with clinical precision. The Council controls 400 star systems and has access to resources that dwarf our entire solar system. They can replace their losses easily, while every ship we lose is irreplaceable. She pulled up projections that made everyone in the room go pale. If they come at us with their full fleet, we cannot win a conventional battle. Admiral Richard Stone listened to the analysis and then presented his own plan. We do not fight them conventionally. We make them pay for every light year they advance, hit their supply lines and logistics, force them to divide their forces, make them fight on our terms in our territory. He looked around the table with hard eyes. We cannot match their numbers, but we can make the cost of victory so high that they question whether it is worth paying. President Morrison authorized Operation Blind Spot to continue into its second phase. While the Council prepared their massive fleet, humanity would strike first at their outlying installations, hit them before they expected it, and show them that Earth could project power beyond its own solar system. The Vigilance was repaired and upgraded over 3 frantic weeks of round-the-clock work. Daniel volunteered to lead the first deep space raid and hand-picked his strike force from volunteers across the fleet. 8 ships departed from Mars orbit under complete radio silence. Their target was Kepler Station, located 60 light-years from Earth, in what the Council considered secure territory. The journey would take 3 weeks at maximum fusion burn, and they would arrive with nearly empty fuel tanks. If they could not capture fuel at the station, they would die in deep space, unable to return home. Every crew member understood the risks and volunteered anyway. The voyage was long and tense. The ships maintained communication silence and ran dark with only essential systems active. Daniel used the time to drill his crews on the new tactics that Amy had developed, based on lessons from the Saturn battle. They practiced coordinated strikes and rapid repositioning until everyone could execute the maneuvers in their sleep. Paul pushed the Vigilance's systems to their limits, testing what the ship could handle when everything went wrong. They emerged from their approach vector at the edge of the Kepler system and found their target exactly where intelligence predicted. The station orbited a barren moon and served as a resupply depot for Council ships patrolling this sector. 4 frigates provided the garrison force. The station crews had heard rumors about some minor incident in a distant system, but dismissed it as exaggeration. The council was eternal and unchanging, and no primitives could threaten their supremacy. Daniel implemented the attack plan with brutal efficiency. 2 human ships emerged from their approach and engaged the garrison directly. The council frigates moved to intercept, confident in their technological superiority. They did not see the other 6 human ships approaching from different vectors, with all systems shut down and running completely dark. The trap closed with perfect timing. Railgun fire caught the council ships from unexpected angles. 2 frigates were crippled before they could raise shields. The other 2 attempted to teleport away, but Amy had calculated their escape vectors. Human ships were waiting at each destination point and opened fire the moment the council vessels materialized. Within 12 minutes, all 4 frigates were disabled or destroyed. Colonel Stephen Hayes led his Marines onto Kepler Station in full combat gear. They breached through 3 airlocks simultaneously and swept through the corridors with practiced efficiency. The station security forces tried to organize resistance, but they were administrators and technicians, not soldiers. Most surrendered when they saw the determined humans coming at them with weapons ready. Hayes secured the command center and downloaded everything from the station's main computers, while his teams rounded up the survivors. The captured data was the intelligence goldmine. Dr. Margaret Phillips analyzed it during the return journey and discovered critical information about council technology and military deployments. The teleportation systems required enormous power generation, which was why only large ships could use them effectively in combat. Smaller vessels could teleport, but only short distances and with long recharge times between jumps. More importantly, the data revealed political divisions within the council itself. The Threxian species had been arguing for a more diplomatic approach to expansion for decades. They believed the council's aggressive policies were creating unnecessary enemies. Several other species shared their concerns but had remained silent out of fear of Valorian dominance. The defeat at Saturn had cracked open old arguments and exposed the council's internal tensions. Paul's engineering teams planted fusion charges throughout Kepler Station's critical infrastructure. The human fleet withdrew and watched from a safe distance as the station vanished in a series of carefully timed explosions. The message to the council was clear. Humanity could strike anywhere at any time. No installation was safe and no garrison was strong enough. The raid's success bought Earth time but also forced the council's hand. Grand Arbiter Thessian accelerated the Grand Fleet's deployment schedule. 150 warships began their journey toward human space. The fleet included vessels from all 7 council species and represented the largest military force assembled in 4 centuries. Commander Vexar commanded from his flagship and plotted a direct route through the fastest spatial corridors. The journey would take 6 weeks, and they would arrive ready to crush this human rebellion once and for all. Commander Lisa Grant tracked the Grand Fleet's movements through a network of long-range sensors and spy probes. She presented her findings to Admiral Clark and President Morrison with barely controlled tension. They are coming in force, and they are not making any effort to hide their approach. This is a demonstration of overwhelming power meant to break our will to resist. Clark studied the tactical projections and began formulating her response. Humanity would not defend Earth in a conventional fleet battle. That was exactly what the Council expected, and it would play to their strengths. Instead, the human fleet would disperse throughout the solar system and conduct a campaign of harassment and ambush. Force the Council to divide their forces and engage on unfavorable terms. Make them pay for every kilometer they advance toward Earth. The civilian population was evacuated to fortified positions on Mars and Luna. Automated defense platforms were deployed around key installations throughout the system. Every ship in the fleet received updated tactical protocols based on lessons learned from Saturn and Kepler. The railguns were modified again to fire even faster and hit even harder. Humanity was preparing not for a last stand, but for a long, grinding war of attrition. Daniel and his strike force returned to Mars orbit as heroes. They had proven that humanity could take the fight to the enemy and win. But everyone knew the real test was coming. The Grand Fleet would arrive in weeks, and then the true war would begin. Admiral Clark summoned all her ship captains to a final briefing before the storm arrived. She stood before them and spoke with quiet intensity. The Council thinks they can intimidate us with numbers and technology. They think we will panic when we see their fleet and surrender to avoid destruction. Her voice hardened. They are wrong. We will fight them in the rings of Saturn and the moons of Jupiter. We will hit them from the asteroid belt and strike from the Kuiper belt. We will make them bleed for every meter of space until they decide this war costs more than they are willing to pay. The captains returned to their ships and prepared for battle. Across the solar system, humanity held its breath and waited for the storm. The Council's Grand Fleet was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Grand Fleet emerged from faster-than-light transit at the edge of humanity's solar system, like a swarm of locusts blotting out the stars. 150 warships arranged themselves in formations that had been perfected over 2,000 years of conquest. Commander Vexar stood on his flagship's bridge and surveyed the emptiness before him with growing confusion. Where were the human defenses and their desperate fleet? He had expected them to mass their forces for a final stand at Earth, but instead found only scattered automated platforms that fired ineffective railgun rounds from extreme range. The platforms were destroyed easily, but they slowed the Grand Fleet's advance and provided targeting data to hidden observers. Vexar pushed forward cautiously, suspecting a trap, but unwilling to show weakness. The Council fleet moved deeper into the solar system, expecting battle at any moment. Instead, they found an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. Daniel commanded a wolf pack of 6 destroyers hiding in the shadow of Jupiter's moon Io. His ships waited in complete radio silence, while their passive sensors tracked the Council fleet's movements. Amy calculated firing solutions based on predicted patrol routes. When a Council logistics convoy passed within range, the human ships emerged from behind the volcanic moon and opened fire with everything they had. 3 supply vessels exploded before their escorts could react. The human destroyers retreated back into Jupiter's massive radiation belts, where Council sensors could not track them effectively. Similar attacks occurred throughout the system. The UEDF Resolution under Admiral Clark's command struck from the Kuiper Belt and vanished before retaliation arrived. Human ships used the asteroid belt like a vast 3-dimensional maze where their smaller size and better maneuverability gave them critical advantages. The Grand Fleet found itself fighting shadows that appeared and disappeared without warning. Commander Vexar grew increasingly frustrated as his supply lines were cut and his ships damaged by hit-and-run attacks. He decided to force a decisive battle by attacking Mars directly. 40 Council warships broke from the main fleet and burned toward the Red Planet. Vexar believed capturing Mars would draw out the human fleet and allow him to destroy them in conventional combat. The Martian defense grid activated the moment Council ships entered weapons range. Orbital platforms that had been built and positioned during the weeks of preparation opened fire in carefully coordinated volleys. Colonel Stephen Hayes commanded the ground-based defenses from deep inside Olympus Mons. Railgun emplacements built into the massive volcano and hidden throughout Valles Marineris engaged the Council fleet from below. The crossfire was devastating. Council ships found themselves caught between orbital and ground fire with nowhere to hide. Their shields overheated in Mars's thin atmosphere, where heat dissipation was less efficient than in vacuum. Vexar threw more ships into the assault, trying to overwhelm the defenses through sheer numbers. The battle raged for 3 days and nights, turning Mars' orbit into a graveyard. When Vexar finally withdrew, he had lost 20 ships and gained nothing. The Grand Fleet's morale was shaken. These humans were supposed to be primitives who would collapse under sustained pressure. Instead, they fought with creativity and determination that no Council species had shown in living memory. Worse, the political situation back home was deteriorating as news of the losses reached the Council homeworld. Ambassador Nicole Foster had been working through secret channels established during the intelligence gathering after Kepler Station. She made contact with Threxian Representative Kiroth, who led a growing faction within the Council opposed to the war. The Threxians were appalled by the casualties and questioned whether conquering Earth was worth destroying the Council's unity. Several other species shared their concerns but feared speaking openly against Valorian leadership. Grand Arbiter Thessian faced mounting pressure to end the war, but his pride would not allow retreat. He authorized Commander Vexar to concentrate the remaining fleet for a final assault on Earth itself. 90 ships would attack humanity's homeworld and force their surrender through overwhelming firepower applied at the heart of their civilization. It was a desperate gamble that ignored everything they had learned about human tactics. Admiral Clark had been waiting for exactly this move. She allowed Vexar's fleet to commit fully to Earth orbit before revealing the trap. Every human warship in the system emerged simultaneously from hiding positions throughout the inner planets. 70 vessels converged on the Grand Fleet from multiple vectors, creating a chaotic three-dimensional battlefield. The Battle of Earth orbit became the largest space engagement in human history. Railgun fire filled the void as human ships executed Clark's carefully orchestrated plan. Instead of fighting as a unified fleet, they operated in independent squadrons that created overlapping fields of fire. The Council ships found themselves unable to concentrate their superior firepower effectively. Daniel led the Vigilance and 5 escort destroyers in a suicidal dive through Earth's upper atmosphere. The ships used atmospheric friction to mask their heat signatures and emerged directly beneath Vexar's flagship. Paul pushed the railguns to catastrophic overload, knowing the Vigilance might not survive but determined to make the shot count. 30 tungsten rounds fired in rapid succession, punching through Vexar's shields and tearing into the flagship's vital systems. The Council commander's ship lost propulsion and weapons and began tumbling out of control. Without Vexar's leadership, the Grand Fleet's coordination collapsed. Individual Council species began making their own decisions. The Threxians ordered their ships to withdraw immediately. Others fought on but without unified command. 20 more Council vessels were destroyed or crippled in the chaos. Grand Arbiter. Thessian watched the battle from the Council homeworld and finally accepted reality. The war was lost, not militarily, but politically. The Council was fracturing, and continuing the fight would destroy everything they had built over 2,000 years. He authorized Ambassador Foster to negotiate a ceasefire through Kairoth's mediation. The negotiations took place on a neutral station between Earth and Council space. The resulting Terra Accord recognized humanity as an independent sovereign power, with full control over their solar system. The Council agreed to establish formal diplomatic relations and respect human territorial claims. Humanity agreed not to expand aggressively into Council space and to share railgun technology specifications under carefully controlled conditions. A joint defense initiative was established, creating a framework for cooperation against external threats. Both sides recognized the galaxy contained dangers greater than their rivalry. The peace was not perfect, but it was real and backed by mutual respect earned through blood. The war's aftermath left deep scars on both civilizations. Over 30,000 humans died in the fighting, and Earth's economy struggled under the burden of military spending. The Council underwent massive political reforms as Thessian stepped down and Kairoth took leadership of a more democratic government structure. The Valorian dominance ended, and the 7 species began treating each other as equals. Daniel received promotion to admiral and took command of Earth's first exploration fleet. His mission was to venture beyond the solar system and establish humanity's presence among the stars. The Vigilance was retired to a museum in Mars orbit, where future generations could see the ship that started the war. 2 years after the fighting ended, a ceremony was held aboard the newly constructed UEDF Enterprise. The ship was humanity's first purpose-built deep space explorer designed for long-range missions. Representatives from Earth and all 7 Council species gathered to mark the beginning of a new era. Ambassador Foster and Kairoth stood together, acknowledging how far both sides had come. Daniel addressed the assembly with words that captured humanity's journey. "We came to the stars with railguns because we had no choice. We fought with what we had, not what we wished for. But now, standing here with former enemies as partners, we can build something better together." The Enterprise's engines ignited, and the vessel began its journey into unexplored space. Aboard were crew members from both human and Council species working side by side. The age of conflict had given way to cooperation built on mutual respect. Humanity had proven they would neither submit nor conquer, but stand as equals defending their freedom while extending partnership to those willing to meet them halfway. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibility. Earth's children had earned their place among the ancient species, not through superior technology, but through courage and ingenuity, and the absolute refusal to bow before tyranny. The railguns that won the war were being replaced by peaceful exploration vessels, but humanity would never forget the lessons learned in fire. Freedom was not given but taken and defended, and sometimes purchased with the blood of those brave enough to fight for it.